Happy Friday, everyone. I'm here with Chloe again, one of my favorite people on the planet, my best friend. And I wanted to talk to you about something that was so much fun. So Chloe had a job recently. She's in acting and she's in the arts. And so she did a job. It was actually really interestingly, coincidentally, if you believe in coincidence, a documentary about recovery and relapse for teens. And so obviously she was not on it because of having an addiction. She was actually on there talking about it from the perspective of someone who is affected or who has been on the other end of people around her who have done drugs.
Yeah.
Right? So it was sort of interesting, and of course with what we do, we have a different perspective.
Very.
And so it was fascinating, and the director that was there that day, he was interviewing her, and he said something so interesting at the end of the interview, and I actually thought you were very articulate. I thought you were amazing.
Oh, thanks, Mom.
But at the end of the interview, he said something that I wasn't sure at first if it was kind of a dig or if he actually was being sincere.
I know, at first, I was like how do I answer that? And at first, I didn't know if his tone was, what he was trying to say. But then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to take it like a serious question, and I'm just going to answer it with a straight face instead of getting... Because I think...
So let me tell him what he said.
Yeah, sorry.
So actually I think he was not... I actually don't think it was a dig. I think he was trying to understand... Because you went in there pretty articulate for your age and a little bit different than I think a lot of teenagers would. So what he asked her was a very interesting question. He was talking about the effects of drugs. He was talking about the culture at high school, what it's like. He went through all of this stuff, who she knows, just some pretty, and it got pretty deep, it got pretty heavy. And then all of a sudden at the end of it, he looks at her and he says, so you've got this perfect life, which she doesn't, okay? But he says, you've got this perfect life, and your life is so amazing. And she actually goes, well, my life is pretty amazing, because she sees it that way. And he says, so why aren't you entitled? Why aren't you one of these kids who is just entitled and a brat and wants to do drugs and party all the time and takes life for granted?
And of course, first reaction, I was sort of like I thought it was a dig too. It was how do I answer that? That was sort of an off question compared to all the other questions that he had asked me where I had very, pretty on the spot, I was able to answer them to the best of my ability. And this one I sort of was taken back for a second. I was like, I don't know how to answer that.
But you answered it great.
So yeah, I did the best I could, and I think, the first thing I said to him, because of what his project that he was doing was based on, it was mostly interviewing people that had done drugs or had an addiction and had relapsed and their story. And of course, I don't have that same story. I have a very different perspective of it. I know people that have, but I see it in sort of a different light. And so I think the first thing that I said to him was, I don't think that where you come from or what you have defines who you are as a person. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect there, thinking that sometimes, you grew up in a quote-unquote perfect home, which I don't think anybody grows up in a perfect home. But, from the outside, maybe sometimes it looks like, oh, you grow up in a perfect home, or you have what you want, you have this, you have that. But I think there's sometimes a disconnect that people don't see. That's who you are as a person and your values and your core beliefs don't necessarily have to, connect all the time with all these things that you get, or that doesn't change who you are.
Well, and that's true whether it is if you're coming from a place where life's been really hard, that doesn't have to define you.
It doesn't define
you. And if you come from a place of privilege and you've been pretty spoiled, that doesn't mean that that has to define you and you need to be an entitled brat.
Right.
So
and that's kind of why I answered it in both ways. Because I know he was interviewing people that had come from, a broken childhood and had a really hard life. So, and I think that was just, I can just kind of have this thought in my head that it doesn't matter where you come from or how much you had. It doesn't define who you decide to be. You have a choice, and you can decide who you want to be.
And one thing I want to point out is when you were young, Where we live, you do see a lot of entitlement. But you know what? You see entitlement. Isn't it interesting that some of our programs to help some of the people who need help the most, right? Our social programs are called entitlement programs. I think that's a really bad name. But they're called entitlement programs. And the reason I don't like that term is because a hand up is different than a hand out. And I heard something when you were little that changed the way I parented. What I heard was, I actually read a book and it was all about entitlement. And basically it went into the science of why entitled people could never be happy. Literally, they can never be satisfied, fulfilled, or happy. And I thought, wow, I mean, that was a huge eye-opener because we have this tendency to want to protect our kids from everything and do everything for them that we can. And I realized that's not going to make you happy or strong or, so just because you live in a place where there is a lot of privilege does not mean you should have everything without having to work. Yeah. Right? So I changed the way I parented a lot based on that book that I read with the science. Mm-hmm. And so, and there's a really good book by a friend of ours, John Townsend, and it's called The Entitlement Cure. I really recommend it. It's really good. So that was one of the things you said. I do appreciate that you said this because not a lot of kids know this or point it out when they're young. It's always usually much older. You did say, I have very stable parents. You told him that. You said, my life is stable.
I think that makes a huge difference. And again, it doesn't matter how much you have or where you come from. Who you're raised by and what you're taught as a kid changes changes your choices and, your decisions and your values when you're older. I was taught from the time I was really little. It doesn't matter how much you have. I was always taught gratitude. And I was always taught to be grateful for what I have and see sort of a glass half full rather than glass half empty. I guess that'd be a good phrase. That sort of mentality. And just to appreciate everything that you have. And I don't think...
Well, and we do believe that to those that much has been given, much is expected.
Right. And
why is the world a better place? Because you breathe. And you do practice gratitude every day. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was such an important question because some of the people that I've worked with, even some people in my family, who struggle the most financially and with doing drugs and with addictions and things like that, are sometimes the most entitled people I've seen. It's not always about wealth. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, you do see a lot of kids who grow up in privilege who are extremely entitled. So I don't think it really has a lot to do all the time with your socioeconomic status. I think a lot of it has to do with your expectations and how you see the world. But you can change that. Yeah. Because when you learn to take responsibility, someone taught me a long time ago when I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And I felt like the world owed me something. And I've always told you the world is, like, life is not fair. You used to say to me when she was little, life isn't fair. This isn't fair. That's not fair. And I'm like, guess what? Fair is a place with bad food and farm animals. Has nothing to do with life.
Okay. This is story time real quick. Okay. Hold on. She used to say, when I would say, that's not fair, she'd go, fair is a place in Pomona. I'm thinking Pomona is some fairy tale land, like Disneyland.
Hold on, they don't know where Pomona is. It's the place near us that has the big county fair.
Okay, regardless, I had no idea what it was. I thought it was some, like, fairy tale land, like, that didn't exist, like Disney, or like Narnia, like that kind of thing. And I was like, I want to go there. Like, if it's not fair here, why can't I go there? I don't understand. And until I was like 8, I never understood. And then I went to the OC Fair, and I had a funnel cake, and I understood.
Right. And I told her, I said, it's a place with bad food and farm animals, has nothing to do with life. But instead, think about what you can do to make it better. What can you do to take control and make life better and take responsibility? Because responsibility basically means the ability to respond. Right? It doesn't mean taking blame. It means taking responsibility. So, anyways, we just wanted to throw that out there. I thought it was amazing. I thought that she answered that question because that could have thrown her off track. And I thought you handled that question so well.
Oh, I almost got thrown off track. But, I almost think that in those situations when your nerves are a little bit up and you sort of get flustered, that your immediate response is sometimes
authentic.
Is the most authentic, rather than going in knowing what to expect. I sort of was like, oh, and that's the immediate answer that I had. So,
well, happy weekend. We hope this was helpful. Have a great day, great weekend,
and good 4th of July.